They say truth always finds its way to the surface. But what if the truth was never meant to be found? What if what we were told to believe was carefully arranged? And what if we, as a society, looked away until it was too late? This is the story of Tyler Robinson and the killing that shocked the nation, the death of Charlie Kirk. A story with too many questions, too many holes, and a silence that feels louder than the gunshot that ended it all. It began like any other morning, a regular day on a quiet campus. Students grabbing coffee, laptops open, conversations about classes and politics. But somewhere, among those ordinary moments, something extraordinary was about to unfold. Something irreversible. A young man carrying a rifle, a public figure known for stirring emotions. Two people whose paths should never have crossed, but did. And when the trigger was pulled, it didn't just take a life. It split the nation in half. And it forced us to confront a question no one wants to ask. Did we fail both of them? Who was Tyler Robinson before the headlines? Not the monster the media painted, not the face on the screen, but the person behind it. Friends say he was smart, quiet, a thinker, someone who questioned everything, maybe too much. Someone who felt unheard, unseen, unwanted, in a world that rewards noise. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, he wasn't dangerous, not until he was pushed into becoming a symbol. But what pushed him? Was it politics? Was it loneliness? Or was it something much deeper, a failure in the system that was supposed to catch him before he fell? Authorities say the shooting was deliberate. They say Tyler knew what he was doing. They say the evidence is clear. But when you start to peel back the layers, that clarity becomes fog. The evidence is conflicting. The witnesses, inconsistent. The timeline, unexplained. And the more you look, the more questions appear. Why was the weapon supposedly found twice? Once at the scene, and again later during an unrelated police interaction. Why was there no continuous video recording from that day? Why do the reports differ about what Tyler did after the shooting? And why do so many details seem to vanish the moment you ask too many questions? The official story says Tyler fled after the shooting, but several witnesses say they saw him return to the area hours later, calm, unarmed, alone. One officer recalls Tyler approaching him, asking to retrieve an item from a parking lot. The officer agrees. Minutes later, the rifle, the alleged murder weapon, appears. But here's the catch. There's no clear video evidence of that exchange, no body cam footage, no time-stamped record. And somehow, the very gun linked to Charlie Kirk's death ends up as recovered evidence. You have to ask, was it luck, coincidence, or a cover for something much more complicated? The public never stops to think about how fragile justice can be. A few words on paper, a few seconds of footage, one assumption. And a life or two can be destroyed forever. And that's exactly what happened here. Before Tyler Robinson even stood trial, his name was already dragged across every major network. He was guilty before evidence was tested, condemned before he could speak. And when that happens, due process isn't justice, it's theater. Investigators insist they followed every protocol, but the more you study the sequence, the more errors you find. Evidence collected hours late, witnesses interviewed days after initial contact, paper trails missing signatures, statements rewritten. Why? Pressure, public rage, a desperate need for a face, a name, a villain. And Tyler Robinson, quiet, intense, politically frustrated, was an easy target. But what about the psychology? What happens when a young man grows up watching leaders argue, communities divide, and truth lose its meaning? What happens when he spends hours in online spaces where anger is currency and empathy is weakness? What happens when his world becomes a constant echo of frustration, feeding on itself? Social media shaped Tyler Robinson's worldview. Every video, every argument, every post, reinforcing his belief that the system was broken. And in that echo chamber, reality starts to fade. You begin to feel righteous, justified, ready to act. But whose voice planted that idea? Whose algorithm fanned that flame? And why are we pretending it's not our collective fault? You see, it's easier to blame one person. It's harder to admit we built the conditions that made this possible. When the story broke, politicians rushed to microphones. Half called Tyler a domestic terrorist, the other half called him a mentally unstable victim. But both sides used his name to fuel their agenda. And once that happens, once your story becomes a tool, your truth stops mattering. Look closer at the evidence. Fingerprints, DNA, text messages, all the things investigators say prove guilt. But how were they collected? Who handled them? Who tested them? And why are there inconsistencies between the early reports and the final documentation? We'll explore that, because it matters. It could be the difference between guilt and innocence. And what about the witnesses? There were dozens on campus that day, yet only a handful were ever called for statements. Why those specific people? Were their accounts consistent with the physical evidence? Were others silenced or dismissed because their version didn't fit the narrative? Some say yes. Others refuse to talk. That silence, that gap, is the hole in this case. And until it's filled, there can be no closure. The truth isn't always hidden by lies. Sometimes it's hidden by convenience, by fatigue, by fear, by people too afraid to lose their jobs or admit they made mistakes. And so, we're left with a puzzle that doesn't fit together, but we're told to believe it does. As we continue this investigation, we'll retrace the steps of that day, we'll speak to those who knew Tyler, we'll examine the official reports and the pieces that were left out, and we'll uncover the details that might change everything we thought we knew. Because in every tragedy, there are always two victims, the one who dies and the truth that dies with them. Stay with me. What's coming next will change how you see this case, and maybe how you see justice itself. And if you want to be part of that journey, if you want the unfiltered truth, subscribe right now, because the deeper we go, the more powerful the story becomes. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. This is the hole in the Tyler Robinson case, and the real story is just beginning. You can measure a society by what it chooses to remember, and by what it tries to forget. Right now, somewhere, evidence sits in a file, untouched. Somewhere, someone knows a piece of this story that could change everything, but silence has value. And in a world built on noise, silence protects those in power. When justice becomes a performance, truth becomes a casualty. You can see it in every press conference, every interview, every headline that promises closure. They tell us the case is simple. They tell us it's solved. But what they don't tell us is what they can't explain. Why were internal reports sealed so quickly? Why did multiple agencies disagree on who led the investigation? Why were certain phone records deemed irrelevant when they placed key figures in the same area? And why, after all the public outrage, does it still feel like we're missing the most important part of the story? The human part. Because behind every crime is a web of failures. Failures of attention, failures of compassion, failures of truth. People saw warning signs but dismissed them. Neighbors noticed changes but stayed quiet. Authorities had chances but took none. When a life ends violently, we rush to point fingers. We want a villain. We want a reason that fits in one sentence, but real stories don't fit neatly. They spill. They stain. They leave questions that don't fade with time. Tyler Robinson is in a cell now, his face forgotten by most, but somewhere out there, families still replay the footage. They listen to recordings. They ask, how could this happen? And each time, the answers sound less convincing. Because once you look past the statements, the politics, and the headlines, you start to realize something chilling. No one actually knows the full truth. Maybe no one ever will. But what if that's the point? What if some stories are meant to remain unfinished so that no one ever has to take the blame? You see, this isn't just about a shooting. It's about how quickly we lose our grip on what's real, how fast outrage replaces understanding, how easily we destroy people with assumptions, and maybe, just maybe, how willingly we trade truth for comfort. Every unanswered question in this case isn't just an oversight. It's a reflection of us, of what we're becoming. We scroll past injustice until it trends again. We condemn before we confirm. We follow stories until they fade, then wait for the next one. And that's how people like Tyler Robinson become forgotten chapters while the real lessons go unlearned. But somewhere in those files, in those recordings, in the unspoken words of those who still can't sleep at night, there's something left to uncover. And we'll find it. Because this story, this hole in the Tyler Robinson case, isn't just a story about guilt or innocence. It's about accountability and the haunting possibility that justice itself can be rewritten. So before we move on, ask yourself, how many other stories like this are out there? How many cases are sealed with half the truth missing? How many people are paying for mistakes that were never theirs? The answers may come soon, or they may never come at all. But we'll keep asking, we'll keep digging, and we'll keep pulling at the threads that hold this fragile truth together. Because someone has to. Someone still cares. Someone still believes truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable. If you've listened this far, you know what's at stake. Don't just watch this story, follow it. Subscribe now, stay with us, and let's find out what really happened, because the real story is far from over.